At 18, Elias Doucette had $43, a duffel bag with a broken zipper, and a letter from an attorney in Houma that had found him at a shelter on Baron Street in New Orleans 6 weeks after his father told him he was done. His uncle Clement had died in September. Elias had not known Clement was sick. He had barely known Clement at all, because his father and Clement had not spoken in 11 years. And in the Doucette family you did not ask about things that had stopped being spoken of. The letter said Clement had left him everything. It listed one asset: a radio station. He had been thrown out on a Tuesday in October, which he would remember later as the day he learned what it felt like when a door closes from the inside. His father was not a violent man. He did not raise his voice. He said in the kitchen of the house on Rousseau Street in Thibodaux that Elias had said something he could not take back, and that Gerald Doucet did not keep people in his house who spoke to him that way. His mother stood at the counter with her back to both of them. She did not turn around. Elias had said something true. That was the whole of it. He had taken the duffel bag from his room and the $43 from his wallet and walked out the door. He did not slam it. He pulled it shut behind him until he heard the latch click. He walked to the highway and hitched a ride to New Orleans, because New Orleans was somewhere and Thibodaux was no longer. The shelter on Baron Street was run by a man named Carl, who did not ask questions and assigned beds in order of arrival. Elias had been there 3 weeks when the letter came, forwarded from his mother's address, which meant she had sent it and not told his father. He read it 4 times. Then he read the address of the property in Houma. Then he went to the front desk and asked Carl if anyone was going anywhere near Houma. Carl said he could think of someone. He was in the parking lot of Dubdi Secam by noon the next day. The building was concrete block, painted white in a decade when white paint made sense, and gone green with bayou humidity since. It sat at the end of a gravel road off Highway 24, the bayou 20 feet behind it. The signal towers standing in the water like 2 metal herons that had stopped moving and never started again. Spanish moss hung from the cypress trees along the bank. The insects were loud in a way that wasn't noise exactly, but presence. The bayou talking to itself. He sat in the car for a while. The attorney's envelope had a key. It fit the front door, which was steel, commercial grade, the kind of door that costs money and lasts. He pushed it open. Inside was cool and dark and smelled of electronics and old tape, and the specific stillness of a room that has been climate-controlled for 11 years without any particular reason except that someone believed it should be. The main room was maybe 30 feet long. A broadcast board ran the length of one wall, faders and EQs and channel strips, and a meter bridge with VU needles that sat at 0. Above the board, a window into an isolation booth, dark, along the opposite wall, equipment racks, a transmitter, processors, patch bays, a reel-to-reel machine on a dedicated stand. Everything was covered in the light dust of time, but nothing was broken. He could see that immediately. Nothing was broken because someone had maintained it, had come in and run the equipment and kept the climate right and then gone home again, 11 years of that, right until he couldn't anymore. On the wall above the board, framed, was the FCC construction permit. Station Bull 1490K8, Houma, Louisiana, granted 1961. The building schematic was printed on it. A floor plan, simple, the footprint of the structure. He stood in front of it for a long time. He had not had a practical skill before he walked into this room. He had not known what he was built for. But he was a boy who had been told, repeatedly and in various ways, that he saw things other people didn't see, and he saw something now. The building he was standing in was bigger than the building on the permit. He paced it, heel to toe, counting. He paced the permit schematic with his finger, the main room, the isolation booth, the utility space at the back. He counted again. The difference was 12 feet. There was 12 more feet of building behind the wall at the back of the utility space, and the permit didn't show it. He went to the utility space. It held a water heater, an electrical panel, shelves with spare cables and connectors sorted into labeled bins the way a careful man sorts things. And at the back, what looked like a utility closet door, hollow core, painted gray, a simple knob lock. He tried the keys on the ring. The third one worked. Behind the door was not a utility closet. It was a room. 10 by 12 maybe, soundproofed. He could see the acoustic panels on the walls, the same foam he'd seen in recording studios and pictures. And the door he'd just come through had a secondary layer of mass-loaded vinyl on the inside, hung on a frame. In the center of the room, a second broadcast board, smaller, older than the one out front, and a second reel-to-reel machine, this one threaded with a tape, a stool, a microphone on a stand, a small desk with a lamp. On the desk, a composition book, a fireproof safe, gray, standard office model, on the floor in the corner. And on a hook on the wall by the door, a pair of headphones. Studio quality, over-ear, the ear cups worn smooth with years of use. He took them off the hook and held them for a moment. Then, he put them on. He sat on the stool. He looked at the board in front of him. The room was the most silent place he had ever been. He opened the composition book. It was a production log. The first entry was dated November 2013, 2 months after the station had gone off the air. The entries were formatted like a broadcast log, date, duration, content, notes, but the content was not music playlists or commercial breaks. The first entry read, recording session, solo, tested inner room acoustics. Acceptable, microphone placement TBD. He read forward. The entries settled into a rhythm, Clement recording himself, alone, in this room, making programs that no one heard, local history. Oral testimonies he collected from old men along the bayou. Music recorded live from musicians who came and sat on the second stool and played. He had been making radio for 11 years into a machine he never transmitted. The log ran to 341 pages. In the middle section, a new format appeared. Session, student, then a name. Then, what was taught. Session, Devonte M., age 15. First visit. Explained signal chain, source to transmitter. He asked good questions. Referred by D. Tran, he counted the student entries. 22 names across 9 years. Ages ranging from 14 to 19. All of them referred by someone named D. Tran after each name. A record of what they'd learned and how long they'd come. And in some cases a final note. Got a job at Dobach. Doing well. Or lost track of him after he moved to Baton Rouge. Or simply, he came back 3 times and then stopped, and I hope he's all right. Elias read the log until the light coming through the crack under the door changed color. He did not look up. He turned pages, and the afternoon went by and the bayou made its sounds outside, and he sat in the silence of the inner room and read. He found the entry near the back. Undated, the handwriting was the same but slower. Elias was thrown out last week. Gerald called to tell me, which surprised me since we haven't spoken in 4 years. I think he called because he felt guilty and I was the one person he could call who would understand guilt about that boy. I didn't say much. I should have said, "Go get your son." I didn't say it. I'm going to do something else instead. He held the book flat against the front of his shirt. He sat on the stool in the silent room and did not move. The headphones were still on. He could hear his own breathing. He could hear his own heart. Doris Tran showed up on the third day. She drove a county car and wore the badge of the Terrebonne Parish Juvenile Probation Office on her lanyard, and she knocked on the front door with a knock of someone who has knocked on doors professionally for 30 years and knows exactly how hard to knock. She was 58. Vietnamese American, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the expression of a person who has heard every possible version of every possible story and is prepared to hear another. She said, "You're Clement's boy." He said, "His nephew." She said, "That's what I meant." She looked past him into the main room. He kept it up. She came in and sat in the chair at the broadcast board and looked at the equipment the way someone looks at a place they know. And she talked about Clement Doucet the way the framework demanded, not the eulogy version, but the real version. She said he was a difficult man in the sense that he had standards. She said she had sent him 22 kids over 9 years, and he had failed exactly none of them, by which she meant he had not given up on any of them, though 3 had stopped coming, and 2 of those she'd lost track of, and 1 she knew for a fact was doing well at a station in Lafayette. She said he had never asked her for anything in return. She said she was going to keep sending him kids. Elias said, "He's gone." She said, "I know. I meant you." She left and came back the next morning with coffee and drank it standing, and did not overstay. She said she had a boy she was thinking of sending over. She said he was 16 and this was his 3rd charge, and the judge had given her latitude to try something. She said she'd give Elias a few days first. He said to send him whenever. His father arrived on a Friday afternoon in a clean truck, which meant he had thought about how he looked before he came. Gerald Doucet was 48 and had the posture of a man who believed his intentions and his actions were the same thing. He got out of the truck and looked at the building and the signal towers in the bayou water, and he made a sound that was close to a low whistle. He said, "Elias." Elias stood in the doorway. Gerald said he had heard about the station. He said he was glad Clement had done right by the boy. He said there were no hard feelings about October, that things had been said in the heat of the moment on both sides. He said he was Elias's father, and that counted for something, and he thought they should talk about next steps together. He said the property was probably worth something in this market, and he knew a man in Houma who did commercial real estate. He said all of this with the face of a man who believed he was offering something. Doris was in the main room behind Elias. She had come that morning with coffee and stayed. She appeared now in the doorway beside Elias, her badge on her lanyard, and she looked at Gerald Doucet for a moment, with the same quiet attention she gave every situation. She said, "Sir, this is a restricted facility." Gerald looked at her. He looked at the badge. He looked at Elias. Elias said, "You should go." Gerald stood there another moment. He looked again at the towers and the water. Then he got back in the truck and drove down the gravel road, and the dust settled behind him, and he did not come back. If you've made it this far into Elias's story, hit subscribe, because what his uncle left on that tape is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He had been looking at the tape on the reel-to-reel machine in the inner room since the first day. The label on the reel was in Clement's handwriting, for Elias, play this first. He had not played it first. He had not been ready to play it. He threaded it up now. The machine was a Ampex, old but serviced. The heads clean. He found the power switch. The reels began to turn. A moment of tape hiss. Then, a voice. It was a broadcaster's voice, full and unhurried, the kind of voice that knows how to occupy a room through a speaker. It was also the voice of a man who had been rehearsing and was slightly nervous and was trying not to show it. Clement said he had never had children and did not know exactly how to talk to young people, but that he had been practicing this for 3 weeks, so Elias should bear with him. He said the family called him crazy for going off the air, and he wanted the record to show that he was not crazy. He said the station had been sold to a conglomerate out of Atlanta, and the new format required him to read copy he did not believe, and he had tried it for 2 weeks, and then he had stopped. He said a microphone was not a place for things you didn't mean. He said that was all. That was the entire reason. He said he had watched Elias from a distance. He said Gerald was not a man who made proximity easy. But Clement had his ways of hearing about things. And what he had heard about Elias over 18 years was a boy who said what he thought and paid for it, and that the paying for it was the part that had cost Clement sleep on Elias's behalf. He said, "You were thrown out for telling your father the truth about something he didn't want to hear. I know that's what happened, because I know Gerald. And I want you to know that going on the air and saying the true thing when it would be easier to say something else is the only thing I ever believed in. I think you might be built for it." He said the station was Elias's. He said the FCC transfer was filed and clean. He said he had maintained the equipment, and it was all working, and the passbook in the safe had enough in it to run the station for a year if he was careful. He said, "I left you a radio station. I hope that's enough. I think it might be exactly enough." He said, "I love you, son. I know I'm not your father." That's the last thing I'll say about that. Tape hiss. The reels turned. Nothing more. Elias sat on the stool in the inner room with the headphones on and listened to the hiss until the tape ran out and the machine clicked off. He sat for a while after that. He did not move to the main room. He sat in the most silent place he had ever been and held what he had just heard and let it settle. Marcus came on a Monday. He was 16. And he wore his situation the way 16-year-olds wear things they haven't learned yet to conceal. In his jaw, in the way he stood in the doorway and didn't come in until Elias stepped back to make room. He was facing a 3rd charge in Terrebonne Parish, and Doris had told him he was coming here, and he had said okay, because Doris was not a person you said no to. Elias showed him the main room. He showed him the board, the faders, the channel strips, the routing, the way audio moved through a signal chain from microphone to transmitter. He did not simplify it. He did not assume Marcus couldn't follow it. Marcus asked 3 questions in the first hour. All 3 were good questions. Elias said, "Come back Wednesday." He came back Wednesday. He came back Friday. He came back the following Monday without being asked. The 3rd week, Elias let him run a fader on a test signal. Marcus's hand on the fader was careful in a way his hands probably weren't careful with most things. He had never been given anything that required him to be careful. Elias watched him figure that out in real time. Word moved through Houma the way word moves in small cities, through the diners and the barber shops and the church parking lots, through the people who had known Clement and the people who had known someone who had known Clement. A man stopped Elias at the hardware store and said he'd heard the station might be coming back on and that he'd listened to Double D Sect in 1987 and could still remember the morning show. A woman left a grocery bag by the front door with a note that said only for whoever's in there. The Terrebonne Parish librarian called and asked if Elias would consider hosting a local history program. He said he was thinking about it. He was thinking about it. He opened the safe. The passbook showed $38,771.19. He spent the first month carefully, keeping the climate control running and the utilities paid, and buying what he needed and nothing he didn't. He read the FCC regulations for and broadcasting with the same attention he had given the composition book. He took notes. He read them again. The equipment inventory Clement had left in the safe appraised the station's gear at $94,200 at current market. He did not sell any of it. He found the entry in the composition book in January. He had been going through the logs systematically, a habit he developed, reading the student sessions in order and writing down the names of the 22 kids Clement had taught. He was building a list, though he hadn't told Doris yet what he planned to do with it. Toward the back of the log, behind a month of solo recording sessions, was a single entry he had missed on the first read. Shorter than the others, a different pen. Session, Elias D., age 8. Clement's nephew. Came with Gerald for Christmas, wandered into the main room and found the board and touched one fader, very carefully, like he was afraid of breaking something. I watched him from the doorway. He didn't know I was there. He stood at the board for 4 minutes and looked at it. Then he looked up and saw me and stepped back and apologized. I told him he didn't need to apologize. I showed him what the fader did. He was there for 2 more hours. He did not remember this. He had been 8 years old. He put the log down on the desk and sat for a while in the inner room with the headphones around his neck. The board in front of him. The microphone on its stand. Marcus was in the main room. He could hear him through the door, the sound of the faders being moved in sequence the way Elias had shown him. The methodical work of a person learning something they have decided to take seriously. Elias looked at the entry for a long time. Then he closed the book. He didn't say anything to Marcus. He went back to work. The station went back on the air on a Thursday in March at noon. The first signal in 11 years traveling from the transmitter building into the towers standing in the bayou water and out across the flatlands of Terrebonne Parish on 1490 Cache. Doris was in the main room. Marcus was at the board. 3 people from the community who had asked if they could be there were standing along the back wall. Ruth from the tribal center was not there. This was not that story. But Clement's neighbor from down the highway, a man named Pete, who had checked the building every week for 11 years while Clement was sick, was sitting in a folding chair by the door. Elias stood at the microphone in the inner room. Through the glass, he could see Marcus at the board. Marcus had his hand on the channel fader. He was ready. He knew what to do. Elias put the headphones on. He looked through the glass at Marcus. Marcus nodded. He opened the mic.